Welcome to our video today on discovering your code. I'm Marshall Shannon with Ministry Design Training, and I'll be your webinar host today as we look at this topic. Part one of this series on your code was understanding your code. Today we're going to talk about discovering your code. I want you to understand that we've broken the ministry design process into 4 phases. They're here on the screen, and today we're going to talk about discovering your code. But it's important that you understand how important discovering and understanding your code is to your ministry and into the development of your ministry design. Your core values, mission, vision, and strategic planning in the implementation of that plan are all resting on the foundation of you discovering and understanding your congregational code. Failure to do so will leave you as the man Christ talked about in the scriptures, who built his house upon the sand. And so we want you to understand that this is the discovery phase that you're going to build your design on. So in discovering your congregational code, let's first talk about why would you spend the time to crack your code? Well, first is the fact that code is based on archetypes. It is based on intuitive responses that individuals have to certain symbols. In psychology, archetypes are defined as collectively inherited unconscious ideas, patterns of thought, or images that are present in individual psyches. And when you put those together, you have to be able to read what your collective group of believers are as a whole, so you don't violate their code. Examples: Chevy, Ford, Chrysler, BMW, Audi, Honda, Toyota, Nissan, they all have archetypes, and they all have a code. And people relate to purchasing one car or another, not always solely on the logic and reason of it, but based on intuition that their code seems to line up with the code of a particular car. For instance, one of our sons went to buy a car recently, and in doing so, he went and test drove a group of cars where he was in another city, and I went and test drove the same ones. Then we talked about it, but he chose a vehicle that he had owned before, new car, and he bought a new one this time. And in doing so, his code led him back to the same car that has served him well for some years. He is aligned with that particular model car and manufacturer. Each of the car owners purchase with a certain psyche in place. Then they'll probably defend or try to explain their choice by logic or reasoning. But intuition was at work way before their logic or reasoning came into place. This is why you like or don't like certain things for the first time. It's because you are conditioned by your code. Let me encourage you to do this. Ask your congregation why they attend your church. It's probably not likely for your theology or doctrine. We make decisions based on intuition, not reason. At least intuition is way ahead of our reasoning. But later we use reason to justify our intuitive decision. We are attracted to our church, our work, our spouse based on their similar codes. Your members choose your church because they are attracted to your church code, even if you haven't yet discovered it. By the way, probably one of the rules in this, it's church code or your personal code is not necessarily good or bad, it just is. And so lost people, people who don't know Christ, can have a good code, and it just is, and so should, and so do folks who know the Lord. Code is best understood when we get out of alignment with it. Because code is directing and guiding and is so powerful, when code functions correctly, it usually is undetectable. It's invisible. It's like the air we breathe. A church incongruent with this code is probably the single greatest cause of church conflict we see as ministry coaches. The end result is churches fail to make changes because they don't know who they are, or they deny who they are and try to live in a way that's inconsistent with their code. So here's a truth, whether you like it or not, the founders of your church probably established and shaped the code of your church. Those following the founders are stuck with the founders' code. How does that play into you're going to take an established church? Well, you better get to know the church well enough that you can understand the code of it. And one way is to understand your predecessors, as they led that church, probably had a great deal more to do with establishing the code than you might like. So, changes that violate that code create turmoil. Those that are following the founders are stuck with the founders' codes. Mislabel the people, sometimes we do. When we misinterpret the situation, we mislabel the people there in the congregation as being rebellious or controlling or difficult or ungodly in some way because we don't understand their code, and we're trying to force them to change in a way that they naturally are in opposition to. Now, what I just said is very important for you as a leader to figure out how you're going to bring about change God is pressing on you to lead, and do it in a way that makes the people want to go with you instead of fighting against you. Another thing is, why crack your code? It's foundational to ministry design. Cracking your code is foundational to ministry design. Developing your design is useless without code clarity. You can design a ministry that doesn't fit, and it will fail. So here's several things. First, your core values flow from your code. Incongruence with your code will cut the flow off of your core values. You can't pick and choose your values. They are what they are. Sometimes operational values are negative. They, for instance, one church that Kevin Ford mentioned in his book, Transforming Church, he gave the examples that one of the operating values of the church, and it was unspoken, but take care of the key people. They're the givers, and they might quit giving or just leave the church altogether. Don't rock the boat. The practice in your operation is the problem, not the code. You need to address and repair what is broken. Your core values, when you identify what they are, will show your character, and they drive your conduct. So there are actual core values versus aspired core values. All of us should aspire to godly values, but our actual core values reflect who we are, our personality, our experiences, our genetics, and our style. How you phrase your values can help your congregation if they are descriptive. In other words, you might say that one of your core values is we value people because God does. We pursue lost people because God does. We care for fellow believers because God does. We are looking to meet God in unexpected ways on our journey with Him. We're serving on the edge of needy mankind. We want to have innovative excellence. We're chasing truth together. And so as you value these things because you believe they represent who you are as you honestly look at them, that it will help motivate your congregation if you can put them in a descriptive way. There are some distinctions. Your core values and your core beliefs are not the same thing. Two churches can have the same core beliefs or doctrine and have two completely different sets of core values. One description is core values are positive and present. Core values are enduring, and you should limit them. Some churches may look to identify 2 or 3 dozen core values instead of limiting it to 3, 4, 5, 6 core values. And what happens when you have too many is that it's too much and it washes out and you don't really pay any attention to them. It's too hard to bring the 24 important things. Narrow that down to top level, top shelf, the key core values that you hold that are directing your ministries, and make them work for you. Let them do their job. The second foundation to ministry design that flows out of your code of why you ought to crack your code is that your mission statement. Your mission flows from your values. Let's define mission. Mission is the collective reason for existing as a congregation in your context, in your community. If your context changes, your mission may change. In other words, if your context changes, people move in or new problems arise, and some people move out, the people that you were planning to reach or the problem you were trying to solve in your mission may have gotten solved, or the people may have left, or you may have reached all of them. And so I can see where your mission might change as your context changes. Every church is a part of the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. But what specifically is yours? Why does your church exist at this time and place? Why did God put you here right now? Mission is the set of guardrails to keep your church on course and focused in the right direction. Think of a riverbank. The riverbank keeps the current of the river in bounds. A mission statement should be short and concise. One of my friends does leadership consulting for international corporations. He has had the same $100 bill in his wallet for some years. He'll stand up and say, if any of you here can state, and he'll pick mission statement, vision statement, and he's had that same $100 bill. He said, I'll give you this $100 bill if you can stand and quote word for word your vision statement, dealing with their corporate design, how they're put together, their business model. And he's never had to give it away. So in doing this, understand that it should be short and concise where people can understand it and begin to understand how they're going to fit in it. They need to buy into your mission and take ownership of it. They need to be in attunement. Their heart needs to be compelled by the mission. It needs to grab them. They need to see the need for it. They need to buy into it with all they are so they can take up their cross, deny themselves, and follow Christ. So your mission statement should captivate your congregation through capturing their reason for existing, an intended outcome, and a primary beneficiary. So here are three things to shoot for with your mission statement. Number one, tell them what you are doing. Are you reaching, sharing, teaching, proclaiming, witnessing, showing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Number two, in your mission statement, who are you targeting? What people groups in your area? Having a target group, it doesn't mean you exclude all the other groups of people or deny them access to your church. You have limited resources. It gives you a way to make some tough decisions about your priorities and those limited resources. So let's say that you were going to target, because of your demographics, married men between the ages of 30 and 36 years of age. Well, guess what comes with that? Infants, preschool, elementary, and teenagers come with that age group. Also, the wives come with that age group. Guess what? Parents, grandparents come with that age group. But if you set to figure out that we're going to reach these group of men, and I've seen churches do this, and God blessed it because it was God's direction. It was his game plan. But they had a very clear mission as to who they were trying to reach. If you just say we're going to reach everyone, again, it's too many and too dispersed, and you don't know where to spend your resources. You have a limited budget, do you not? And limited people, workers, and limited time. You want to use everything and steward it correctly. Consider picking target groups that you're going to pursue with your resources. And number three, that you state in your mission statement, is what are you trying to accomplish in their lives? In the target group's life, are you trying to see that they choose to become fully devoted and developed followers of Christ? So you want to state these three things. What are you doing? Who are you targeting? And what are you trying to accomplish in their lives? So here's a rule. When your ministry flows from a transforming code, your church will be healthy and probably fit for the calling that God has put on it. But you have to first discover and then understand the code that you have of the collective personality of your church. So core values protect and preserve your code in the face of changing times. Your values may not change. You might add some. but your methods will change. It will protect and preserve you so you don't do something that isn't priority with your church, because core values drive your ministry. Secondly, in summarizing this, mission expands the reach of your code and your influence, because you find people, and God puts people in your pathway who have a similar code and want to come to your church because they feel a connection that's deep down inside their person. It's at the depth of their being, and they connect with you on that level. So here is a great benefit to discovering your code. Are you ready for this? One of the great questions of life simply is, who am I? Discovering this and developing your efforts personally and professionally is a powerful experience that can lead to transforming your lives and the lives of others and ministries. To unlock the power of your church's DNA, you must discover, understand your code, design your ministry around it, and develop your people and programs to grow out of it. Doing this can help you reach your full potential. So as we look at this and as we continue it, it is important that you crack your code. Now, let's answer a very important question. How in the world do we crack our code? How are you going to do this? If it's intuitive, if it's out of sight, like the oxygen, and you know it when it's absent because you can't breathe, how do you crack your code? Well, to begin with, let's look at some symbolic expressions. Symbolic expressions of your code. A symbol, as we define it, and this is not original with me, this is other men like Kevin Ford and others who talk about and define and give us this information. But when you define a symbol is something that represents something else by association, by resemblance, or convention. A symbol is the unconscious expression of a cultural archetype. The members of a church will relate to the same symbols without knowing it, exactly why. It works by imparting meaning, evoking emotion, and creating an aha understanding. It might help us to understand the root of the anonym to this. Diabolic, which is the devil. The devil's work is to do what? To divide, to confuse, and to disconnect us from reality. And so as you look at the symbolic expressions in your church, and you see something that is representing something else, and we all have them. The cross is representing something else. The communion cup is representing something else. If you have the offering plates and you're passing them, or any of the stained glass and the stories that are told on the stained glass, they're symbolic expressions of a deeper story and truth. So when you describe symbols, they are intangible and adopted by a culture and a community without much conscious effort. Some examples of this would be body language, nonverbal gestures, vocabulary, phrases that we use, or jargon. Some tangible ones, and they're clearly seen by all, is that of your church facilities, or religious items like the cross or communion cup, the pew, the steeple, the stained glass. So we tell stories and we have rituals that tell these. So as we look at these expressions, there are 4 primary forms of symbols that will help us crack our code, decipher what is there. Number 1, you need to look at the stories. This symbol of stories usually comes from the history, and it may mean much to the church. They explain the history of your church in story form, what the story is all about. They may be larger than life and take on a life all their own. They help define who you are. They provide meaning, communication, and history, and they provide meaning, communication about your church. They point to a deeper truth about the church and God's interaction with you. I'll give you a story about one particular church. I read it just the other day. James Emery White talks about that when they bought their acreage, they had 90 days to design and build their facility. Now, don't think that's the norm. That is remarkable, and they pulled it off. That story and how God did that at Mecklenburg Community Church is told over and over again, and it sets a code about it. It can set a code about that church and about the people in that church. But it is a story. The story can be tragic, heroic, it can be a comedy, or romantic, or action-packed. So, when you stop and look at the stories that are told about the church, what stories are told? What did they see God do? What was the parting of the Red Sea? What did God do? Then there are rituals. Rituals symbolize the beliefs, the archetypes, the behavior patterns, and the ideals of your church. They do not serve as a pragmatic purpose, but you consider them socially and spiritually essential. They are carried out for their own sakes. They have value to you and perhaps to you alone. So in your church, you may have certain ceremonies that you do, worship formats and the way that you worship, calendar events, weddings, funerals, communion, and other things that you do in a certain way. Then there are events that are they're routine, they're rituals that you carry out. Potluck suppers, communion times, baptisms. There may be gatherings such as reunions and annual picnics or annual softball games or any number of things that you do related to any program and any people in your church. Then the third symbolic expression is you stop and study not only your stories that are told and the rituals that you do, but the heroes. And the heroes usually are personalities that shaped the church in years past. They are living legends, or maybe they're legends of the past. They can be imaginary or real. In some corporations, I say that because Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse for Disney are a type of hero, not so much Donald Duck. And so as you look at this, they can be imaginary or real. They also possess highly prized characteristics that symbolize the church. Someone who had a ministry that was revered and respected and honored by the people there, and they want to emulate that and carry it on. Whole denominations have heroes in them, and so do individual churches. And it's shaping who you are as a people. It's shaping your code. So if you want to crack it, you study the stories, the rituals, the heroes, and then the media. You look at your logos, your bulletins, your websites, your blog posts, your brochures, your mail-outs, and then you look at your architecture and your decor. You may look at the style how you built your building. Did that really reflect who the church is? The flow of your campus, the landscaping, the interior decor and exterior decor, paint colors, the kind of equipment and furniture and fixtures that you picked. The texture of and context of your entire campus reflects your code. So past heroes symbolize your code. Former pastors, matriarchs, and patriarchs reflect your code. If a congregation can look at their collective passions and personalities, they can go a long way toward cracking their code. This effort is usually right-brained, it's intuitive, as opposed to left-brain that is logic and reasoning. So we survey the congregation by asking a series of questions. Who are you as a church? What first attracted you to the church? What is most different about your life since coming to the church? Once you discover your code, your values, mission, vision, and strategic plan must be in alignment with it. If any of these can't gain any traction, then it may be they're out of alignment, attunement, and agreement with your code. You have to resolve this conflict to move ahead. For instance, saying you value winning souls doesn't mean it is a part of your code. It may be an inspired code, but not an actual one. Something has to give. Something has to change. Your profession and practice must agree, or you'll have problems. So in other words, we need to become a good detective to discern how our church expresses its code, its personality. Code is your core identity. It contains the blueprint of your genetic makeup, nature, and nurture, your shared experiences. Values, mission, vision, and strategy represent conscious intentions to define and unleash your code through action. Your stories, your rituals, your heroes, your decor, your architecture are symbolic expressions of your code that reside and express themselves beyond your conscious awareness. You have to have eyes to see it. So you've got to become a good detective and look right-brained at it with your intuition to read what is there. And we don't put the pieces together easily, but they're symbolic expressions that are residing and expressed beyond our conscious awareness. So why do so many churches fail to identify their code and live in accordance with it? Well, I believe it's difficult to pinpoint incongruence, but it's easy to detect it. You see the results of the incongruence, but fail to identify it as the cause of the trouble. We know something is wrong, but we don't know what's wrong. We seek to apply the wrong solution to the wrong problem. We misdiagnose the problem. We may be thinking, well, these people are rebellious and stiff-necked and they don't love God, when actually we've asked them to do something that is running against their nature and their nurturing that they've had during their lifetime. So we use symbols to help us determine our code. So what is a symbol? It is something that represents something else by association, by resemblance or convention. A symbol works by imparting meaning, evoking emotion, and creating an aha understanding. The antonym to symbol is diabolic. The devil works to divide, confuse, and disconnect us from reality. Members of a culture all relate to the same symbols without really knowing why. If the symbol is right, it taps into their emotions. If the symbol is not connecting, it just dissolves and goes away. Now, how do you change your code? Well, there's really only a couple of options, I think. First is to merge. You splice two codes together. Now, one easier way to do this, if you have two churches, both with 30 people in them, and there's some history to the churches, meaning they're aged, and you try to merge them together, you can do it, but often neither church in the merger may be happy with the new code formed by the merge. Think heart transplant. Productivity may be restricted, and it takes time for the body and heart to sync up and to grow together, to work together. So if you're going to merge together, it may take time to tell if the merger will work. Mergers are not usually the best option for churches. It rocks the church at their very core, which is your code. Blending two people into one is not medically possible yet. Churches merge, but it is a difficult venture. Sometimes you get by the difficulties by allowing a small church to join a large church ministry who stays dominant in the relationship, and the small church is adopted and merged into the larger church. So there's got to be congruence there with the code. So if you're going to do this, to change your code, you may merge with someone else and have to adopt their code and agree to do so. Not easily done. Another option is to add a group to multiple worship services in ministry. So you start a Saturday night church to a particular people group in your community who would never come to your Sunday services, and you end up now with a group in your church who have a different code who you're ministering to, and they're really like a separate church that you've started. And so you can merge a small church into a big church, and maybe the small church stays where they are, but now they're a part of the church family and reap all the benefits of that. The second way is to replace with a new code somewhere else. And so a second location or replacement location that eventually replaces the mother church. Let's say that you're in a place where you've got a drastically, radically changing demographic, and who your church is, your membership, is no longer sees their reflection in the community. And a new people type are moving in, and you just can't connect. So you go start a church in another location where it does reflect in the mirror who you're connected to, the people of that community, demographically, psychographically, echographically, that you're connected to them. And you eventually let the old place die out or start a church there that ministers to and mirrors the new demographics. So you have to sort this out, and God will give you direction as you do. But that you would understand that changing your code is going back and trying to change your nature, how you were made in the womb, and your nurturing, how you were reared, and the experiences you have. And it's difficult for a zebra or a tiger to change their stripes. Now, going from that, how to align your congregation with your code. It is important that you catch what I'm about to say. First off, follow a ministry design process that protects you and your congregation. Follow one that will help you understand how important the code is, and then how you build your core values as a foundation on the soil or the foundation of your ministry. What you're resting your ministry design is on the very personality, the essence, the soul of who your people are. So you don't build a design that is incongruent, that is out of alignment, and no one wants to help you with any of the ministries because it doesn't resonate with them in their innermost being, in their passions, in their experience, in their personality, in the very essence and soul of who they are. So follow a ministry design that will help you. And so your values should protect your code. Your mission statement should reinforce your code. Your vision should express your code. Your code should guide decision making. So this is rather a negative approach to steering your ministry, but necessary nonetheless. You are driving your ministry to stay out of the ditches. You are working to avoid violating your code. But once you have established your code and people are aware of it and can understand it, and it begins to energize and synergy comes about among them, it makes the work and labor of the leadership team much easier because the people are self-directed and guided by their code. When you don't have that, you're constantly working, trying to get your ministry and your congregation to commit themselves to the work that you've set up and designed for them to do. This may be why, or part of the reason why, the national average for people who are actively involved in ministry is at 20%. 20% of the people in the average congregation is doing 80% of the work. And so as we look at this, maybe it's because the ministry design is not in a congruence with the code of the people, and they're not energized. They're not exhorted in their spirit and their walk with the Lord to do it. It's not matching up. So how do you protect it? Well, you follow a ministry design process that will protect you, because your decision making is guided by your code and driven by your core values. It drives what you do. Who does what in your ministry, who leads, who you hire, who you fire, who you accept as memberships, who is doing the work as lay volunteers. It is key to your future and present performance. Your brand and marketing material should be designed with your code in mind. You don't want to mislead people with who you are. So you don't want to mismarket who you are. Failure to do so may cause you to mislead people about who you are as a church. Your property and campus design should reflect who you are. Don't enter a new building program or seek to relocate without discovering and developing your code. Don't renovate without discovering and developing your code. Your ministry design should reflect who you are. Your code should be integrated throughout your ministry and facilities. So redesign what is out of alignment with your code. Then why do people attend your church? Why do people attend your church? And how do you understand your church? Well, let's answer the first one. How do you understand why people attend your church? A person's decision to attend your church is usually made in a moment. A person may drive by your campus and decide within 2 or 3 seconds if they might be a good fit just by looking at your campus, at your architecture, landscaping, location, everything. If they visit, they will decide whether to return, or whether not to return, and they'll also do that within 3 or 4 seconds. Before they meet a single person or sing a single song in your worship services or receive a bulletin, a brochure, or a handout, they will decide whether or not to come back. The rest of their experience will either confirm or challenge their initial impression. So the 3-second response is rooted in our brain's limbic system. This system determines instantly which sensory inputs will be accepted or rejected. And this system of our brain is the center of emotion. At least that's what I'm being taught. It is the door to our subconscious. It alerts us to danger or safety, to stress or comfort, to fit or not. And as you understand this, people often make decisions to attend your church based on these early impressions. They judge if there is a fit between your code and their code. Biologists and psychologists understand the power of intuition to mine subconscious experiences empowered by our emotions. Often this happens before we can reason with our brain whether or not to attend. We all make significant decisions based on intuition, not reason. We can't explain, even though we try to support our feelings by logic and reason, why we decided to do or not do something. Something deep inside our personality resonates with a particular code. It makes us feel safe to purchase a big-ticket item or develop a trust relationship with another person. It is driving our decisions in life. People attend your church because your codes match. It binds you together. And at the deepest part of who you are as a church and as people coming to your church and considering being a part of your church, they are looking at the deepest connection they can find, and it's happening subconsciously. Unless you violate your conscience and then or your code, and then they'll leave or they'll fire you. So people attend your church because your codes match. It binds you together unless you violate it. And then they'll leave or they'll get rid of you as the leader. So how do you understand your code? First, there are barriers to intuitive, creative understanding of your church code. And the barriers first come, they're mental barriers. And usually it's logic and reason, which us men folk, we want to be logical, and we look at our wives and say, well, she's just not logical. She's not reasonable. If you think left brain only and allow yourself to use only your reason and logic, it will hinder your discovery and understanding of your code. You've got to look at this with right brain. In other words, don't be Spock where it's not logical. Consulting, audits, finances, policies, procedures, and so forth is only one approach, but seldom do they produce discovery of your code. Our ministry audit at Ministry Design Concepts is not designed to detect a church's code when we're just looking at it left brain or with the logic, and we're looking for objective results from your ministries and how they're put together and organized. And so as we do this, we've got to use intuition and right brain thinking. Men struggle with this. We're looking for evidence in concrete form, that which can be seen with the naked eye and measured objectively. We want objective evidence of our code. We want to use our logic and reasoning. Identifying your code is a right-brained activity. Code is deeply embedded in the symbols that draw people together in community. It cannot be flushed to the surface by reason alone. Intuition must play a part. You've got to somewhat forget science and think with your gut feeling. Now, this is hard for me, and it's probably hard for you, that we want to look and be able to read it like we do something written on a page. And so I have a tendency to run to the architecture and draw conclusions from that as to what the code of the congregation is. But when you ask the right questions, and we'll get to those in a moment, and begin listening to the stories and the rituals and the heroes and the media and the concrete things that are there, the visuals, that you can begin to get an understanding of the code. And so here's just a thought. Understanding your congregational code requires more the soul of an artist than that of the tools of a scientist. It requires listening to your intuition more than reading charts, graphs, and financial statements. You can know the stats of every person in ministry in your church and miss really knowing and understanding those people. In other words, we may look at a resume of a person that we're wanting to bring to our church to serve in one ministry or another, but until we begin to talk to that person and listen to their story and understand their nature and their nurturing and look at their shape, their spiritual gifts, their heart, their abilities, their personality, and their experiences, and begin to get an idea of the code of this person, we can miss it. And so if you can know the stats on every person in ministry in your church and really miss knowing and understanding them. Just because a guy served for a while here and had good results doesn't mean that you really know him and his character and his creed and his conduct and who he really is in his code and how he's going to live out in the future his life. You have to listen to them. You have to hear their passions and their stories. There is the second one, and that is manipulation. Manipulation, to be manipulative, is forcing what we want to be instead of accepting what is. Churches try to define and declare their code instead of discover it. You can't force reality by trying to change what really is. Churches start predetermined ministries and then ask people to serve instead of researching what they're passionate about and driven toward, and then develop ministries out of that passion. In other words, top-down processing when it comes to ministry design, and then forcing your people as a square peg into a round hole to fit into the ministry, and standing up and begging them leads us back to the 20-80% rule. 20% of your people doing the 80% of the work in your ministry. You can change that, I believe, as God directs and empowers you by discovering and understanding and developing the code of your congregation so that you design your ministry to follow after the godly passions of your people to minister to a certain people in a certain way, in a certain place, and to accomplish a God-given result. So manipulation is the idea that we are predetermining ministries and forcing people to serve into it instead of researching what they're passionate about. We carve out a set of values or craft a mission statement or create a vision statement that isn't aligned with your church's code. They don't stop to realize the process is wrong. It yields wrong results, wrong direction, and functional foundation for your ministry. Instead of doing that, start with a person or persons with particular gifts and passions and form ministries around them. This will help you identify the genetic makeup of your congregation's code. And let your ministry design and your ministries and your mission flow out of your congregation's code. You need to understand it or you'll design against it instead of toward it. It's a barrier to understanding your code. Then there's mimicry. Mimicry is pursuing the next big thing, is what Kevin Ford calls it in Transforming Church. We have a lust for the next big thing, the car, the house, the pleasure, the event, or the church program, activity, or process. It's very tempting to identify models of ministry that work well in other churches and to borrow them to seek the same results. We shouldn't import them because they grew their ministry out of their code, not our code. It needs to be God's will and fit our code if you're going to do that. We are bypassing God often and the process for determining His will and how to carry out His will. We are bypassing the discovery and creative process God intends to build in us spiritually and community-wise. And we end up with unintended consequences. Mimicry inhibits true creativity because somebody else created it, and we don't want to take the time to master plan our own God-given ministry design. We just easier to plug and play, to borrow somebody else's ministry model and come plug it into our ministry in hopes it will have the same results for us that it did for the church we borrowed it from. Lack of unique code to bond people together in shared ministry happens out of mimicry. A lack of attention to the critical role of your local context and the formation of your church's focus flows out of mimicry. A depersonalization of ministry as leaders find themselves spending all their time keeping the machinery running smoothly, trying to get people to come in and putting a guilt trip on them, begging them, leveraging something against them to get them to come commit themselves to something that works against their code. Mimicry modeling requires additional energy from leaders to keep people engaged, pumped up, and focused. Relationships are sacrificed on the altar of pursued success. Shortcuts in this are no good. A barrier to your understanding and developing your code so you have a solid foundation for your ministry design is mental barriers of thinking left-brained instead of right-brained, and listening and observing and thinking and talking with God for Him to help you understand your code and discover it. Being manipulative or mimicking somebody else's ministry. Now, there are some investigative questions that you ought to ask, and I'm going to give them to you in two different ways. Left brain questions help you identify the symptoms of disease or signs of health, and there's any number of books that are on my website, Ministry Design Concepts, dealing with church health. But you can look at the left brain questions, what's logical and reasonable and objective. They expose congruence with your code. So here's what you ask. Do you feel the church has a clear statement of faith? Can you give me your vision statement? Your vision statement. Do you feel that your church has a clear vision statement, a clear mission statement, a clear value statement, a clear strategic plan that will work? Has your church clearly told the difference between itself from other churches? Are you excited about your church's direction and future? Do you love to tell others about your church? Do you have a personal commitment to your church's future? Does your church have a clearly defined group of people it's trying to reach? Are your church's goals and directions clear to you? Do guests quickly experience what your church is about? Do your church's ministries clearly reflect your core values? These are left brain questions that I feel comfortable asking, and people may feel comfortable answering yes or no, or answering with short answers that are maybe sometimes subjective, but they're judgment questions that they're answering, but they are objective. It's either clear or it isn't. Then there are right brain questions that you can ask. Right brain questions are the best way to discover your code. Simply get people to tell their stories. Ask them, what is your most meaningful memory of our church? What first attracted you to our church? Can you describe your earliest experience at our church? How is your church different from the one you attended as a child? What is the most noticeable difference about your life since attending our church? Those are right brain questions where they are going to tell their stories. You may ask them, who do they remember as in church as being a type of hero or a faithful believer that made an impact in their life? And their code is being nurtured, and nature has been at play, but nurturing them so they can look, and it will help you as you listen to your people. You'll begin to pick out stories and heroes and other things that we've covered to help you pull together your code. Now we move from this to some directives of codes. What I mean by that is just some general rules. First off, every church has its own unique code that defines its identity and declares its focus. In much the same way a person falters in life without a sense of identity, a church does that. A church that doesn't know itself is fated to struggle. When people don't know who they are, a gap can appear between what they claim to be and what they really are and what they want to become. A cultural dysfunction of being disconnected from one's true identity has infected the church. We have dealt with controversial issues and made distinctions between ourselves and others, theologically, separation, etc., that have failed to understand really who we are as churches. Deep down underneath the ideological and political labels that we've put upon ourselves. Failure to correctly identify our code and act in alignment with it will reap conflict and trouble that distracts and damages our efforts to worship God, to work with Him and for Him, and to walk with Him. So we need to have personal identity. Next, resisting change when it's out of line with code. People will resist change that you recommend in your ministry when those decisions to change don't align with your code. Understanding your code requires the soul of an artist more than the tools of a scientist. So understanding the requirements, you want to think as an artist intuitively with your feelings and how it feels in its aura than you do as a scientist looking for hard evidence. Next, when a strong imprint occurred, is as important as what it was. So past experiences influence our future decisions. So our early childhood experiences of church direct our decisions as adults about joining a church later in our lives. It works. I've watched my sons do it and others who have grown up in church, left and gone to church, that they're looking for something where their codes are in alignment with the church that they're joining or considering joining. A person's decision to attend your church is usually made in a moment. Another rule is your values protect your code. Your mission statement will reinforce your code. Your code will and should determine everything you do, from decisions about programs and personnel to property and design. Your mission reinforces your code. Members will resist any change that is in conflict with the code and push back at the leaders if they are perceived as not protecting the code. By discovering your code and protecting it, your members will have a sense of safety and respond to change favorably. They will get behind it, and your code actually becomes a catalyst to propel needed change. Protect the code, and it will serve you well. Your people may not know why they respond the way they do, but they will respond. Let none of your decisions violate your code. Your environment says a lot about the identity of your code. Buildings, architecture, maintenance, quality all say something about who you really are. And so your mission is to reinforce your code. Let none of your decisions violate your code. Navigate change with code in mind. Your environment says a lot about your code. Incongruence, being out of alignment with your code, will present itself as something just isn't right and I can't put my finger on it. And that little voice that is keeping you awake at night and nagging on you is an incongruence with your code. So discovering your code requires an intuitive approach. Everything about your church is communicating in total who you are. Learn to observe and listen. Code involves ministry priorities, so live by them. When your code flows from a transforming code, in other words, understanding and developing your code, your church will be healthy if it acts in accordance to, in agreement with your code. You must know your code before introducing change. Code usually stays the same, but methods change as needed. If you challenge your code, you will lose. And so let's step from that to the dominance or the power of code. Code shapes your culture, your values, your mission, and your focus. Code is the defining essence of your church. Code shapes the stories we tell, the traditions we follow, and the unspoken rules we obey. For instance, someone walks into your worship space and sits down with a cup of coffee, and it has been the practice and norm of your church not to bring food in. And they may not know why, but they just know you're not to bring something in. Somebody else may ask them, please go out and finish your drink before you come in. Now, the Bible doesn't say thou shalt not drink while you worship. But I've known people and have known people who felt in their code that that was a violation, and it was important to them. And they felt like perhaps it was disrespectful or going to distract you in your focus, or you were going to spill it all over the place, and eating and drinking there created trouble. It wasn't the designated place for it. And I just picked that as one example. But it may be an unspoken rule or tradition. Failure to maintain congruence leads to trouble. Matter of fact, let me go back to the code shapes your stories and traditions and unspoken rules. Your written rules can be in violation to the code of your people. So be careful that the rules and policies you set up as a church don't violate your congregation's code, their essence, their innermost being. Failure to maintain congruence leads to trouble. Code creates a context for vision and planning to occur. Code sets the direction for your congregation. It is powerful, and we best discover, develop, and fully understand and design in congruence with our code. A protected code will over time harmonize your congregation and ease the leader's load. It acts as a launching pad for change. It allows for powerful ministry. It attracts people to your church. It acts like a picture frame, providing boundaries, color, and shape. All of these things are working, and your code is helping you do these things. It acts like a filter to screen new ministry ideas. You better understand what your code is. If violated, it can lead to unhealthiness. Well, I'm Marshall Shannon, your ministry design coach with ministry design training and concepts. You can reach me at this email address or either one of these phone numbers, and I trust the Lord to richly bless your efforts as you go about to both discover and then understand, develop, and deploy your code and your ministry design so it serves as a solid foundation for how you put together your ministry, either in redesigning it or asking God to renew and refresh you spiritually, and how you go about ministry needs to be in some way changed.